My fiancée exploited me for my finances and social standing, then left me for a high-earning banker. I disappeared from the scene without a word. That was when her picture-perfect life began to crumble in full view of everyone. I'm a 31-year-old man working as a mechanical engineer in the aerospace sector, based in Seattle. I've always considered myself to be just your regular guy. Slightly overweight, though. I've been hitting the gym to change that, and my hairline's been slowly retreating, something I'm gradually making peace with. My comfort zone lies in discussing tensile strength and load capacity, not the latest trends in fashion or interior decor. I come from a modest middle-class family in Michigan, where hard work was the currency of survival. I got through college on a mix of academic scholarships and long shifts at campus cafes, and was lucky enough to land a stable job right out of graduation. And that's when I met Jessica. She was 28, stunning in a way that made people do double takes, an executive in marketing at one of the city's most respected firms. Our paths first crossed 3 years ago at my buddy Kyle's birthday party. Jessica was the plus one of Kyle's co-workers. To this day, I'm still mystified as to why she gave me her number that night. Women like her, flawless, charismatic, looking like they stepped out of a high-end editorial, don't typically give guys like me a second glance. But she did, and we connected. Or at least I thought we did. The first year felt like something out of a dream. She brought energy and excitement into my life, always up for new adventures. What surprised me most was how genuinely engaged she seemed with my work. Aerospace engineering isn't usually a hot topic at social gatherings, but Jessica listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and even sent me encouraging messages before major presentations. She once wore a corny NASA tee I bought for her to bed. It felt like a sweet gesture, like she cared about what mattered to me. In hindsight, I now see the warning signs that were there from day one. But love has a way of blinding you to the truth. Jessica would slip in comments that I took as encouragement, remarks about how I had the potential to rise quickly in my field, how I could easily make senior engineer status if I just put in more hours or dressed more sharply for meetings. At the time, I thought she believed in me. What I didn't see was how she was quietly trying to shape me into someone else. A year into the relationship, the tone began to shift. Her helpful advice gradually morphed into thinly veiled criticism. My apartment, which I had always thought was pretty nice, suddenly became too modest for a man of my position. My reliable Honda Civic became a source of embarrassment next to her sleek BMW. My circle of friends, once appreciated for their loyalty and laid-back charm, was dismissed as being unambitious dead weight. Even my brother, Alex, my best friend and confidant since we were kids, started being quietly edged out. He worked in construction, a job Jessica clearly thought was beneath her social standing. But I was head over heels. So I adapted. I upgraded my wardrobe, traded beer nights for networking soirees, and forced smiles through dull conversations with her boss. I began to distance myself from my brother, from the people who'd known me the longest. I even passed on a promising job offer in Chicago, one that could have significantly boosted my career, because Jessica insisted that staying in Seattle was crucial for her career ties and family proximity. After 2 years together, I got down on one knee. She cried when she said yes. The proposal was followed almost immediately by wedding planning, plans that spiraled out of control. Jessica had her sights set on an extravagant event, one that would easily surpass what I earned in a year. "It's not just a wedding," she'd say, brushing aside my concerns. "It's an investment in our social capital. These connections will open doors for us." Reluctantly, I agreed and set up a separate account. Every bonus, every overtime check. I tucked it all away, watching the fund slowly grow. After months of scrimping, I had $22,500 saved solely for the wedding deposits. Jessica hadn't put in a single cent. She claimed her contributions were happening in other ways, whatever that meant. I didn't challenge her. I was blinded by love, or perhaps just stupidity. Half a year before the big day, she shifted focus. Now it was about the house. Not just any house, of course. She had her heart set on a $785,000 townhouse in the priciest part of Bellevue. That's where her fellow executives lived, and she was adamant we needed to be there if we were to be taken seriously. "Mike," she told me, her tone urgent, "if we want to be seen as equals in this crowd, we need that address." It didn't matter to her that the mortgage would drain every penny I had, and then some. Still, I caved, foolishly. We started the process, with me listed as the primary borrower because my credit score was better. Jessica was already imagining the interior. She had entire Pinterest boards dedicated to every room. She promised her parents their own guest suite with a private bath for their visits from Portland. It all seemed so real, so certain. The wedding was just 4 months away. Our closing date on the townhouse was a month after that. Financially, I was walking a tightrope. I remember one late night hunched over my laptop, cross-checking a spreadsheet, trying to figure out how I could cover a mortgage, the wedding costs, and still manage groceries and utilities. The math didn't lie. I couldn't afford it. What baffled me was that, on paper, our combined incomes should have been more than sufficient. But Jessica had drawn a hard line. Our finances would remain separate until after we tied the knot. "It's just more organized this way," she said with a smile. Yet somehow nearly every major financial responsibility had landed on my shoulders. That night I decided we needed to talk. I showed her the spreadsheet, walked her through the numbers, and voiced my growing concerns. I suggested that maybe we should consider a more reasonable home in a different neighborhood. Her expression was pure disbelief, like I had proposed we live in a rundown shack. "Mike," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "do you even want to succeed? That neighborhood is more than a place to live. It's an opportunity, influence. We need to surround ourselves with people who can elevate our careers." I pushed back. "We can't do this unless you're willing to contribute. The mortgage alone is beyond my limits." She exhaled dramatically, as though I were being difficult for no reason. "I told you, I'm managing the wedding logistics and planning the honeymoon. And once we're married, I'll be up for a huge promotion. My salary's going to double. We just have to keep up appearances until then." This was the first I'd heard of any promotion. Still, it gave me a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the financial pressure would ease up soon. Maybe everything she promised would come true. Despite the gnawing tension in my gut, I pushed it aside and chose to move ahead with the house plans. Jessica was brimming with enthusiasm, and I convinced myself, again, that maybe I was just overthinking it all. The following weekends were consumed by an endless carousel of open houses, meet and greets with interior designers, because our current furniture, she claimed, wasn't aesthetic enough for the neighborhood, and back-to-back dinner parties with her social circle from Bellevue. Each event only deepened my discomfort. These weren't my people. The conversations felt hollow, the smiles rehearsed, the laughter artificially bright. But Jessica, she glowed. She'd introduce me with a proud, polished tone. "This is Mike, my fiancé. He's an aerospace engineer." Not like I was a person with dreams, history, or struggles, but like I was a trophy she could polish and display, her very own talking point. It was dehumanizing, but I bit my tongue. Then, one ordinary evening, the facade shattered. I'll never forget that moment. I was waiting in line at QFC, a local grocery store, balancing a basket filled with an odd assortment of items: pizza rolls, scented trash bags she preferred, and a few energy drinks to push through a tight project deadline. My phone buzzed. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. I assumed it was another update about the wedding cake or rehearsal dinner plans. But the message wasn't about any of that. 8 words. That's all it took to detonate my world. Weddings off. Expect a call from my lawyer. Nothing else. No explanation. No warmth. No punctuation beyond that stark final period. It read more like a cold memo than a breakup text. My heart plummeted. My fingers went numb. The cashier had to repeat himself before I realized it was my turn to pay. I remember the drive home being eerily silent. My brain couldn't form a coherent thought. I parked in front of my apartment and sat in my car, unmoving, for 15 whole minutes. There were no tears, no shouting, just a vacuum of sound and sensation. I eventually made it inside, dropped my keys, and stared at that text again. My only reply was, "As you wish," a line from The Princess Bride she probably never understood. But I knew what it meant. It was my way of saying goodbye without begging for answers. The message spoke volumes. It wasn't just a cancellation of vows. It was a dismissal, a business transaction abruptly terminated. She didn't want dialogue. She wanted detachment. And she believed she controlled every piece on the board. But she'd overlooked one critical detail. While her message was still burning on my phone screen, I had a realization. The mortgage documents hadn't been finalized. The wedding savings were in an account solely under my name. Our joint financial accounts were still in the early stages. Nothing was sealed, no contracts signed. I still had power. Still wearing my coat, I opened my laptop, logged into the bank's mortgage portal, and canceled the entire application. 3 clicks. That was all it took. With one swift move, her vision of suburban bliss in Bellevue evaporated. Some might call it spiteful. Maybe it was. But after 3 years of compromising who I was, of sacrificing friendships, job offers, and family time to fit the mold she wanted, I needed to reclaim some shred of dignity. What followed was one of the strangest nights of my life. I braced myself for the backlash, for texts, calls, maybe even a furious visit. But there was nothing. Radio silence. That absence, that vacuum where fury should have been, was worse than any argument. It confirmed my growing suspicion. I had fulfilled my purpose, and now she was done with me. I barely slept. My thoughts spiraled through every memory, each overlooked red flag, each time I swallowed my pride. Had she been planning this for weeks? Was I just a placeholder until someone more affluent came along? Questions echoed with no answers. Still, the next morning, I forced myself into my routine. I went to work, even though I moved like a ghost. My team lead, a perceptive guy named Rob, took one look at me and asked if I was feeling okay. I hesitated, then said, "Jessica ended things. Weddings off." His face softened with empathy. "Take some time, man, seriously. The project will still be here when you get back." His kindness nearly broke me. I nodded and left. On my way home, I stopped at the grocery store again. Maybe out of habit, maybe for comfort. That's when I saw it. A bridal magazine on the shelf, flaunting a glossy image of a woman in the same gown Jessica had chosen. I stood there frozen, the world moving around me while I stared at a stranger in a white dress that used to symbolize my future. It hit me again, just yesterday. I was going to marry this woman. Today she was a ghost who had scorched my life from a distance. Back home, I began the painful but necessary process of packing up her belongings. Her toothbrush, a couple of dresses, and a stack of books she never read. It was startling how little of her truly existed in my home after 3 years. She always preferred her place, said it was more refined, more conducive to her lifestyle. Another clue I should have noticed sooner. I boxed everything with clinical precision, labeled it Jessica's Things, and left it by the door. And then, for the first time in far too long, I reached out to my brother. Alex answered on the second ring. Our conversation was short, but it grounded me. He didn't gloat or say, "Told you so?" Even though he'd never liked Jessica much, he just said, "I'm coming over. I'll bring pizza." That simple gesture hit harder than anything else. That night, with greasy slices in hand and our favorite video game humming on the screen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Despite the heartbreak, despite the humiliation, there was also relief. A deep, profound exhale. I had been living inside a mold that wasn't mine, suffocating under expectations that were never truly mine to begin with. Less than 2 days had passed since that brutal text, and I was sitting on my couch with leftover pizza rolls from that fateful grocery run, trying to wrap my head around everything. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it, then let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready. Whatever it was, it could wait. A minute later, a message arrived. The voicemail alert blinked on my screen, a quiet reminder that unresolved pieces of this story still waited for me. For a moment, I just sat there, holding the phone in my palm, staring at it like it might explode. Part of me hoped it was a mistake, a last-minute apology, maybe even an attempt to explain. But another part of me, the part that was finally beginning to see things clearly, knew better. I played the message. The voice on the other end wasn't Jessica's. It was a woman. Sharp, professional, and painfully detached. "Hello, this is Dana Marcus from Callaway and Finch, calling on behalf of Ms. Jessica Langston. We'll be initiating proceedings for asset separation and wedding contract dissolution. Please expect formal paperwork within the next 3 to 5 business days. If you have any questions, contact our office at..." I hung up before she finished. That was it. Not even the courtesy to call herself. Not a single word from the woman I'd spent 3 years building a life with. It was like she had scrubbed me from her story, outsourced the final chapter to a legal assistant. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just felt cold, like every ounce of warmth had been siphoned out of the room. But within that chill, something else stirred: resolve. I wasn't going to let her dictate the narrative anymore. No more bending to her will. No more pretending I belonged in a world that saw me as an accessory. For the first time in what felt like forever, I started thinking about what I wanted. Not what Jessica wanted. Not what her friends expected. Just me. I closed my laptop, finished the last slice of pizza, and opened a blank notebook. I began to write, not about her, but about me. What I'd sacrificed, what I'd ignored, and what I deserve moving forward. The next chapter wasn't going to be written by lawyers or dictated by cold texts. It was mine to shape, word by word. The moment I played the voicemail, I knew Jessica wasn't done trying to control the situation. "Hello, this is Rebecca Goldstein, attorney for Messica Chambers. We urgently request a call back regarding your mortgage withdrawal, as this action may constitute a breach of contract or financial interference. Please contact us immediately." Her tone was crisp, clipped, and laced with urgency. I almost laughed out loud at the words, "urgently request." So much for all that cold professionalism. Amazing how polite and accommodating people get when money is on the line. I didn't respond. I didn't call. I didn't email. I just waited. And just as I predicted, the messages began to pile up. First a second voicemail, then emails. Each new note sounded a little more desperate than the last. They hadn't expected resistance. Jessica, being Jessica, likely assumed I'd be devastated, paralyzed, maybe even begging her to reconsider. But she'd miscalculated. I wasn't groveling. I was healing, and I was finally done being her fallback plan. The next morning, I got a call from Kyle, our mutual friend, who had unknowingly played a role in how Jessica and I met. He sounded uneasy, almost embarrassed. "Hey man, did you seriously back out of the house deal?" he asked, voice cautious. "Yeah," I replied calmly. "Okay. Well, Jessica's kind of losing it," he said with a nervous chuckle. "She already ordered like 18 grand in custom furniture, told everyone at her office to start looking at places nearby, said you two were moving into the neighborhood next month." I didn't respond. The silence must have hung too long because he added, "I mean, she's saying you're being vindictive, that you're trying to punish her by pulling out." I exhaled slowly, biting back the urge to snap. "Kyle," I said, steady and low, "I'm not buying a house with someone who ends a 3-year relationship over a text message." He hesitated again. Yeah, that's fair." There was another pause, and then he said something that stayed with me. "Just so you know, she's been telling people different stories about what happened. Some folks think it was mutual. Others say you were difficult. That there were, things she couldn't talk about. Things she couldn't talk about." After we hung up, that phrase echoed in my head. What things was she suggesting? That I'd been abusive? That I cheat? That I have some dark secret? The fact that she was feeding different versions of our breakup to different people told me one thing. She was spinning the narrative. And people only do that when they know the truth might not paint them in the best light. In the days that followed, I found myself caught in a strange rhythm. Waves of emotional detachment mixed with crystal clear realizations. Like I was waking from a long, confusing dream. I started thinking about old conversations, little moments that had once seemed innocuous. I remembered Jessica casually mentioning that her ex-boyfriend had been generous to a fault, how she expected more from someone in a committed relationship. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, those words took on a predatory edge. She'd always had a subtle way of planting dissatisfaction, never overt, never harsh, just enough to make you feel like you should be doing more, giving more, earning more. I began scrolling through photos on my phone, pictures of the two of us from vacations, weddings, and social events. In nearly every image, she was perfectly poised, camera ready, smiling like she was auditioning for something. I, on the other hand, looked out of place, tense, like someone trying to match a role they'd never asked to play. That disconnection hit hard. I'd spent so long reshaping myself for a fantasy that was never mine. Then came the financial reality check. I opened my bank statements and calculated everything I'd spent on our relationship over 3 years. The result was staggering. Nearly $65,000. That included vacations she insisted on, upscale restaurants where I always picked up the check, surprise gifts for her work milestones, and of course the wedding fund. Meanwhile, Jessica's contributions had been minimal at best. She cooked occasionally, sure, bought me a birthday gift or two, but the disparity was overwhelming. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the pattern. A relentless cycle of take, with hardly any give. I'd convinced myself this was love, but love isn't measured by how much you sacrifice. It's about partnership. And this had been a one-sided performance. 1 week after the infamous breakup text, I sat down and started making calls to all the wedding vendors. Each one was another stitch unpicked, another vision unraveled. Telling strangers that the wedding was off felt like confessing a personal failure. Most were professional, sympathetic. Some deposits were forfeited, which stung. But the worst was the call to the bakery. They were a family-owned shop we'd chosen after a delightful tasting session. The owner, a kind elderly woman, had been so excited about our custom design. When I told her the wedding was canceled, her voice fell. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," she said gently. "You two seemed so in love." "I thought we were," I replied softly. After the final call, I made a fresh pot of coffee and stepped out onto the balcony. The Seattle rain had started to fall, the sky painted in shades of gray. I stood there for a long time just watching the drops hit the railing, and for the first time since that gut-wrenching text, the tears came. Not for Jessica, not even out of heartbreak, but for the man I had become, the future I thought I was building, the life I had believed in. It was all gone. Yet beneath the sorrow, something unexpected was stirring, a quiet determination, a flicker of resolve. It was the realization that, painful as this all was, I had been given a rare chance, a second shot at choosing a life that actually reflected who I was. I wasn't mourning Jessica anymore. I was mourning the illusion. That's when another email notification buzzed on my phone. It was from the mortgage broker. The subject line read, "Application terminated. Future options available." I stared at those words, reading them over and over. Future options available. It felt like the universe was speaking to me in the most unexpected way. What no one knew, not Jessica, not her lawyer, not even Kyle, was that in the weeks leading up to that brutal text, I'd already begun noticing odd behavior, little inconsistencies, strange things that didn't sit right. Late-night emails that she'd close the moment I entered the room, sudden trips for networking events that she hadn't mentioned beforehand. Her phone is always on silent. I told myself I was imagining things. I didn't want to be paranoid, but now, in hindsight, those red flags were blinding. It wasn't until the pieces started falling into place that I let the suspicion bloom into certainty. One night, about a month before she ended things, I had walked into the living room unexpectedly. Jessica had been typing furiously on her laptop, but the second she noticed me, she snapped it shut. "Just work stuff," she had said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't press her. I had trusted her completely. Now I remembered the name that popped up once on her phone, Darren M. She had dismissed it as a new vendor contact. But why would a vendor text at 11:30 p.m. on a Saturday? The thought made my stomach twist, but also sharpened my focus. Whatever had happened behind the scenes, she had already emotionally exited the relationship long before sending that text. She had started her new life, quietly, covertly, while I was still dreaming of our wedding day, and that hurt more than I expected. Still, no matter what she had done, I wasn't going to waste my energy chasing shadows. I had a future to build, a better one. One not dependent on appearances or expensive dinner parties or the approval of her corporate circle. One built on honesty, mutual respect, and real love whenever and wherever that came along again. For now, I would be patient, rebuild, heal, and wait for whatever came next. Because, unlike Jessica, I hadn't given up on love. I had just stopped settling for the illusion of it. There were those unexplained client dinners that always ran suspiciously late. The way her phone would immediately lock the second I stepped into the room. I had noticed it all, the subtle signs, the strange shifts in behavior. But I chose not to believe them. I told myself relationships take trust. Jessica was just under stress, but now, with everything unraveling, those blinders finally came off. For the first time, I wasn't searching for excuses. I was facing the truth, so I stayed silent. I didn't respond to her lawyer's voicemails. I didn't acknowledge the flurry of emails. I didn't explain or apologize or react. I let them spiral. Let them sit in the silence and wonder what I'd do next. That silence? It was the most powerful move I could have made. 3 days after she nuked our relationship via text, I heard a knock on my apartment door. It was just past 8 p.m., and I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Mr. Chamber, Jessica's father. The last time I'd seen him, He had lifted his wine glass at a family dinner and given this heartfelt speech about how proud he was to welcome me into the Chambers family. That version of him was gone. Now he just looked worn, eyes heavy with concern, and something close to shame. He didn't even greet me before asking, "What's going on with the house?" I crossed my arms and stood my ground. I'm not buying a house with someone who ends a relationship by text and then sends her lawyer to deal with me. Are you here as her representative? His eyes dropped to the floor. No, he said after a pause. I'm here because she won't tell us anything. One minute she says the wedding's off, the next she's ranting about furniture invoices, credit score damage, and being humiliated in front of everyone at Apex Marketing. For a moment, I considered telling him everything. The red flags, the inconsistencies, the suspicions I'd quietly collected, but I didn't. I simply said, she ended things. She can handle the fallout. He nodded slowly, clearly holding back his own thoughts. Then, under his breath, he muttered, I told her not to do this. And with that, he turned and walked away. I stood there staring at the empty hallway after he left, and a strange sense of calm settled over me. Like the weight of pretending was finally lifting, but the real earthquake hadn't even hit yet. The next morning, my phone lit up with a call from my brother, Alex. He and I had been inseparable growing up, but over the past year, Jessica had managed to wedge herself between us with passive-aggressive digs about his blue-collar job and how he didn't mesh with our new social tier. We hadn't spoken in almost a month. Hey, bro, he said cautiously. I heard about what happened. Kyle told me. There was a pause, and then his tone shifted. There's something I need to tell you. I should have told you months ago. My stomach turned. What is it? Remember that renovation gig I had over at Cascade Heights? That luxury apartment complex downtown? Yeah. I saw Jessica there, with some guy. They were going into his place together, and it didn't look like a work meeting. I stopped breathing. I wasn't sure what to do, he continued. Didn't want to mess anything up in case I was wrong, but I took a picture, just in case. As we stayed on the line, my phone buzzed. He'd sent the photo. My heart pounded as I opened it. There she was, Jessica, in a sleek dress I didn't recognize, walking into a high-rise building beside a tall, well-dressed man with perfect hair and an air of practiced confidence. His hand rested gently on the small of her back. Intimate, familiar. The timestamp read, 2 months ago. His name's Ryan, Alex added. Asked around. He's some hotshot investment guy. Drives an Aston Martin. Thinks he's God's gift to finance. That name clicked instantly. She'd mentioned Ryan before. Framed him as a difficult client from her firm. Nothing more. But clearly he was much more. After the call, I went into full detective mode. I pulled up her Instagram. Most posts had been locked down to private. Red flag. But I could still view tagged photos. That's where I found it. A picture from a charity gala taken 3 weeks earlier. The same weekend, Jessica claimed she was away at a spa retreat with girlfriends. She wasn't in the main frame, but in the background, you could see Raya posing with a group. And at the very edge of the photo, unmistakably, was Jessica's arm in that same dress from the apartment photo. My pulse quickened. I checked our shared wedding planning cloud account. In the recently deleted folder, I found a series of selfies Jessica had taken. They weren't in our apartment. The backdrop, floor-to-ceiling windows, a sleek city skyline, and a panoramic view of the Space Needle. Not my place, not our life. This was someone else's apartment, probably Ryan's. The pieces were falling into place fast now. Her sudden criticisms of my salary, the growing push to buy a home we couldn't afford, the subtle digs about my wardrobe and professional image. She hadn't just been drifting, she'd been upgrading, preparing to leave, lining up a better option, and I'd been the stepping stone. I took the rest of the day to let it all soak in, to let the rage and heartbreak settle. And then I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I picked up the phone and called Trevor, my old college buddy, who had started his own engineering firm in Denver. He'd offered me a position ages ago, but I'd turned it down because Jessica didn't want to leave. Seattle. "Hey, stranger," he answered with a laugh. "You finally ready to take me up on that offer?" I smiled for the first time in days. "Is it still on the table? For you?" "Always." That night, after hanging up with Trevor, I sat on my couch for a long time. No TV, no music, just the quiet hum of the city outside my window. My world had turned upside down in a matter of days, but I felt something unfamiliar. Clarity. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. I knew who I was again, and I knew I was done being the version of myself I had created just to fit into Jessica's world. The next morning, I opened my laptop and began mapping out the logistics, housing in Denver, timelines, and budgeting. It felt strange, refreshing even, to plan for a future that was solely mine. No compromise, no ego to cater to. Just goals, dreams, and a clear purpose. I updated my resume, scheduled a call with Trevor, and began the process of ending my lease early. I also called my parents, something I hadn't done in too long. My mom cried when I told her the wedding was off, not out of sadness, but relief. "I never wanted to say anything bad about her," she admitted, "but I'm so glad you see her clearly now." So was I. In the days that followed, I packed methodically, boxing up my life piece by piece. But this time, it wasn't like when Jessica and I talked about moving. There was no pressure, no second guessing, no fear of saying the wrong thing. Just momentum. Purpose. The silence from Jessica continued, and I realized she wasn't going to come clean. She wouldn't apologize or explain or admit anything. She was going to spin her version of the story, the one that made her look like the wounded party. But I no longer cared, because I wasn't the man she left. I was the man she had underestimated. To what do I owe the pleasure? "How's that job offer looking?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, though everything inside me felt raw. On the other end of the line, Trevor chuckled. "You finally dumped the princess?" he teased. "Job's still open, man. $125,000 base, relocation included. When can you start?" It was the first time I genuinely smiled in days. "How's next month sound?" That call with Trevor felt like a life raft after days adrift in a storm. He didn't ask for the messy details. He didn't probe about the breakup or try to play therapist. Instead, he jumped straight into talking about the work. Engineering projects I could sink my teeth into, a smart and driven team I'd be joining, and the stunning hiking trails just an hour outside of Denver. It was everything I'd been missing. Direction, purpose, possibility. When we hung up, I felt lighter, charged with energy I hadn't felt in weeks. I grabbed a notepad and began scribbling lists, things to pack, things to sell, people to notify, paperwork to file. The tasks grounded me. Each item checked off was a small reclaiming of autonomy, a quiet step away from the chaos she'd left in her wake. That night, lying in bed, I finally let the reality of it all settle in. Jessica hadn't just cheated. She had methodically built an exit plan. She'd spent months constructing a life raft, preparing to jump ship the moment something better came along. I wasn't just blindsided by infidelity. I was betrayed by the calculation behind it. She wasn't impulsive. She was deliberate. And that made the wounds run deeper. I found myself staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing, my mind jumping back and forth through time. I wondered when she first met Ryan. Was it before or after she said yes to my proposal? Had she been comparing us the entire time? My salary, my career, my lifestyle? Had I been nothing more than the safe bet until the shiny option became available? Sleep didn't come easily. Instead, I scrolled through months of old texts, hunting for cracks in the facade. And there they were, hidden in plain sight. Late-night client meeting, she'd said on the same night she'd tagged herself at a gala I wasn't invited to. Sorry, babe, work emergency, she'd texted, canceling dinner last minute. Her tone had shifted slowly over time. More criticism, less warmth. Subtle digs at my spending habits, my hobbies, even my friends. It had all been leading to something. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolved. I typed up a formal notice to my landlord, gave my 30 days, and hit send. I filled out the online application for a Colorado driver's license. Then I emailed the few close friends Jessica hadn't managed to alienate, letting them know I was moving. Some offered to help pack, others sent support. All of them said the same thing in different words. We're glad you're getting out. But Jessica wasn't done haunting my inbox. That afternoon, I received another email from her lawyer. This one was far less cordial. It insisted I had both a moral and legal obligation to follow through on the home purchase. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to a lawyer friend of mine and went about my day. Still, her father's words kept echoing in my mind. I told her not to do this. What exactly had he warned her about? Ending things the way she had? The lies? The secrecy? It didn't matter now. Jessica's perfect little image was starting to fracture, and if what I suspected was true, it wouldn't be long before even more came to light. The next morning, just when I thought things might finally stabilize, my bank called. Not an automated fraud alert, a real person. A specialist from their fraud prevention team. Mr. Thompson, she said, we've flagged a suspicious transfer attempt from your joint savings account. Someone tried to withdraw the entire $22,500 last night and transfer it into a personal checking account under the name Jessica Chambers. My chest went cold. I immediately requested that the transfer be blocked and the account frozen. While still on the phone, I asked for a full access log and requested copies of every transaction and login attempt over the past 72 hours. As if on cue, my email chimed. A new message. Subject line: Urgent Wedding Funds. It was from Rebecca Goldstein, Jessica's lawyer. My client is concerned about the funds held in the joint account created for the wedding, she wrote. She has informed me that she made several direct contributions and paid vendors. She believes she is entitled to reclaim a significant portion. My pulse quickened, not with panic but with disbelief. This was a blatant lie. I had receipts, bank statements, transfer records, everything. Every single cent in that account had come from me. Jessica had never contributed. Not a dime. She'd claimed it was smarter for her to pay vendors directly and keep our finances separate until after the wedding. Now she was pretending otherwise. I forwarded the email and documentation to Trevor, who connected me with his brother-in-law, a family law attorney. Within 20 minutes, I had a reply. Save everything. Every message. Every record. You need a lawyer. So I did. That afternoon, I scheduled a consultation with Sher Levan, one of the most well-known and aggressive family law attorneys in Seattle. Her reputation was legendary, her retainer steep, $5,000. Worth it. She reviewed my documents, skimmed the emails, and leaned back in her chair with a look of cold satisfaction. Mr. Thompson, she said, steepling her fingers, you've shown remarkable restraint. What did Miss Chambers attempt? That was attempted financial fraud. That day, Sher drafted a formal cease and desist letter addressed to Jessica's attorney. It included complete documentation, every deposit, access log, and record proving the wedding account was solely funded by me. She warned that further attempts would result in legal action. Cher advised me to cut all contact with Jessica. From that point forward, everything would go through official legal channels. No calls, no texts, No surprises, clean and ruthless. That evening, I turned off my phone and tried to rest. The next morning, I woke to dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and emails. Some were from unknown numbers. Others were from mutual friends, urging me to call Jessica. A few messages were emotional, others were accusatory. And then I saw it. An email from Jessica herself, sent at 3:14 a.m. It wasn't an apology, not really. More like a rambling attempt to justify her actions. "Things got complicated," she wrote. "I never meant for it to end like this." She blamed stress, confusion, even my supposed emotional distance. But nowhere did she admit fault. Nowhere did she acknowledge the betrayal. She ended it with one sentence. "I just wanted us to have a future worth showing off." That said it all. Jessica never wanted a partnership. She wanted a trophy life. And I was done being part of her display. I didn't respond to the email. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I focused on packing. Every drawer I emptied, every item I boxed, was like peeling away the remnants of a life built on compromise and illusion. And with each step, I felt stronger. I wasn't running away. I was moving forward. In a few weeks, I'd be in Denver, starting over, not as Jessica's fiancé, not as the guy trying to live up to someone else's image, but as myself. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like more than enough. Jessica's calls came in rapid succession, 8 of them in under 10 minutes. When I didn't pick up, the text messages started pouring in like a floodgate had burst. The tone was accusatory, defensive, desperate, shifting with each message. "I can't believe you got a lawyer. We need to talk about this like adults. You're being irrational." Then came the one that truly solidified my decision to ignore her. "Did you freeze the account? I need that money for cancellation fees." I didn't reply, not a single word. Instead, I compiled every message, every missed call notification, and forwarded them to Cher. Then, with a steady hand, I blocked Jessica's number for good. The following morning, my phone rang again. This time it was Kyle. His voice, normally upbeat, sounded tense. "Dude," he said, "Jessica stormed into the office this morning and went nuclear. She's telling anyone who'll listen that you're trying to ruin her financially, that vendors are threatening legal action, and that you're hoarding the wedding money out of spite." I paused, processing. "That's interesting," I said evenly, "especially since I have documentation that proves I paid for everything, and she didn't contribute a cent." There was a brief silence before Kyle lowered his voice, as if afraid someone might overhear. "That's not all. She's also saying you were controlling, that you isolated her, monitored her finances, and made her feel trapped, that she had no choice but to leave." It was like being hit with a bucket of ice water. Jessica wasn't just twisting the narrative. She was rewriting history. "Kyle," I asked, my voice low and tight, "you've known me for years. Do you believe that?" "Of course not," he replied quickly. "But not everyone here knows you like I do, and Jessica, she's persuasive, people are buying it." After we hung up, I sat frozen in my chair, that sick, hollow feeling returning to my gut. Then I snapped into motion. I forwarded everything to Cher. Her reply came almost immediately. "This changes our strategy. We need to move fast, get testimonials, friends, family, anyone who can attest to her behavior. We need to shut down these lies before they spread." The next 48 hours became a blur of frantic organization. Cher was meticulous, walking me through each step. I gathered messages from friends where Jessica had belittled my brother for working in construction, screenshots of her complaints about my wardrobe, and emails where she nitpicked how much time I spent with my own family. My brother Alex didn't hesitate. He provided a sworn statement about catching Jessica with Ryan, outside that upscale apartment complex, detailing the suspicious body language and the timeline. Other friends offered written statements describing her dismissiveness, her constant need to control where we went, what we wore, and who we saw. Meanwhile, Jessica's lawyer sent a new email. The tone had shifted entirely. My client is deeply distressed by how public and contentious this has become, it read. She is willing to relinquish any claim to the joint savings account if your client will work with her on resolving the house matter. In other words, Jessica knew she'd been caught in a lie and was now bartering what wasn't hers in exchange for an out. Cher's response? Surgical. Miss Chambers has attempted to commit financial fraud and has engaged in deliberate defamation of my client's character, she wrote. The funds in question were contributed solely by Mr. Thompson. Furthermore, there is no property to resolve. As no purchase was completed, there will be no negotiations. We are fully prepared to pursue damages if required. That evening, while the legal firestorm simmered, I tried to reclaim a sense of normalcy. I resumed packing, this time with a sense of purpose. Each object I handled felt like a memory I had to judge. Keep, discard, donate. The luxury wristwatch Jessica had pressured me into buying, sold. The stack of overpriced design magazines, gone. The science fiction books she'd ridiculed, safely packed front and center. As the night deepened, my phone kept buzzing with messages. Friends of Jessica, people I barely knew, some pretending to check on me, others more direct in their accusations. But I stayed silent. Cher had been clear. No contact. Everything through legal counsel. At midnight, I opened my laptop for one final check. A message caught my eye. Subject line: You should know the truth about Jessica. It was from a woman named Megan. I almost deleted it. Scam, maybe, or another ploy. But curiosity won. Megan claimed to be a former colleague of Jessica's from a past job. She got straight to the point. Jessica has a pattern, she wrote. She's done this before. She attaches herself to high earners, manipulates them into making financial commitments. And once she's got what she wants, or finds something better, she walks. The story Megan told sounded all too familiar. Jessica's last boyfriend, a physician who'd financed her car, paid for her apartment upgrades. When he proposed, she broke it off, claiming incompatibility. 2 weeks later, she was publicly dating her department head. I reread the message 3 times, heart pounding. Was it true? Or just a bitter former friend with an axe to grind? Regardless, I forwarded it to Cher for her professional opinion and shut the laptop. By morning, I had my answer. Rebecca Goldstein, Jessica's lawyer, had left a voicemail. We would like to propose a settlement discussion regarding all outstanding matters. Her tone was conciliatory, the legal sharpness dulled into something almost nervous. I immediately called Cher. She picked up on the first ring. Funny, she said. I was just about to call you. I did some digging on Miss Chambers last night. That email from Megan? It checks out. But that's not the only skeleton in her closet. She explained that Jessica had been involved in 2 previous small claims disputes over shared property with former partners. In both cases, she'd tried to extract financial compensation post-breakup under questionable pretenses, claims that were eventually dismissed due to lack of evidence or proven bad faith. This woman has a pattern, Cher concluded, and now she's about to learn that patterns don't help in court. They hurt. The conversation reinvigorated me. I dove deeper into my preparations for Denver, finalizing moving arrangements, submitting paperwork for my new job, and scheduling a meeting with a Denver-based financial advisor. I wanted to rebuild smarter this time, with safeguards and clarity. In the midst of it all, I also reached out to the baker whose wedding cake I'd canceled. I didn't owe her anything more, but I wanted to express my appreciation. Thank you for your kindness, I wrote. The wedding didn't happen, but your excitement and professionalism were unforgettable. She replied with warmth and understanding, offering me a free pastry box if I ever visited again. That small kindness reminded me that not all relationships are transactional. Not all connections are fragile. Some people are simply good, and those are the people worth holding on to. As the legal process moved forward, Cher continued compiling evidence, and the pressure clearly began to rattle Jessica's camp. More messages came in, now from mutual friends asking if I'd consider making peace, if I'd be open to talking things through. The implication was obvious. Jessica's image was unraveling, and she was scrambling to control the narrative. But I had no intention of letting her manipulate the aftermath the way she'd tried to control the relationship. I'd let the facts speak. The evidence, the statements, the pattern of behavior, all of it told a clear story, one she could no longer rewrite. The silence on her end grew louder, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. Let's just say your ex-fiancée has left quite a trail of financial entanglements behind her, Cher said, with a tone that was both factual and faintly amused. I've got a call scheduled with Ms. Goldstein this afternoon. In the meantime, how's the packing coming along? I smiled, appreciating her subtle reminder not to get swallowed by the chaos and to keep my focus on Denver, on the life that awaited me far from the wreckage Jessica had left. Making progress, I said. Denver's starting to feel real. Good, she replied, her voice firm but encouraging. The best revenge, Mr. Thompson, is living well. Remember that. As I ended the call, my doorbell rang. Another unexpected visitor. The roller coaster showed no signs of slowing down. Later that night, around 10 o'clock, a Facebook message popped up from a name I didn't recognize. No profile picture, just the name. Ryan Mitchell. The message was simple but startling. We should talk. I don't want to be part of whatever game she's playing. My hands were trembling as I typed back. Talk about what? His reply was quick. About Jessica. About the lies she's been telling both of us. We agreed to meet the next morning at a downtown coffee shop. I arrived early, scanning the room with a wary eye. This could be anything, an ambush, a misunderstanding. But right on time, the man from the photo walked in. Tall, well-groomed, the watch on his wrist caught the morning light. Classic finance bro. Mike, he said, extending a hand. I'm Ryan. We got our coffees and found a quiet corner. The tension between us was palpable. After a moment of sizing each other up, he spoke. I need to know, when exactly did you and Jessica break up? 4 days ago, I replied. She texted me that the wedding was off. His expression twisted into something between confusion and disbelief. She told me you two broke up months ago, that you were just finalizing the house stuff out of guilt because her family had invested in it. I felt the familiar pit return to my stomach. That's a lie. We were engaged until the day she sent that text. The wedding was scheduled for June. He looked genuinely shaken. Jesus. We've been seeing each other for almost 3 months. She said her ex was clingy, that he wouldn't accept the breakup. That's why she couldn't post about us publicly. 3 months. That lined up exactly with our venue selection, the finalizing of guest lists, and even the cake tasting. I swallowed hard. There's more, Ryan said, glancing around before continuing. She told me you were controlling, that you monitored her spending, that she had to end things quietly because you were becoming physically intimidating. I blinked, stunned. That's absolutely false. I've never touched her, never yelled. Ask anyone who knows me. Ryan nodded slowly. I believe you. Things weren't adding up. Last week, She told me she needed $15,000 for an investment. Got really upset when I hesitated. Then yesterday she called me in tears, saying her ex was trying to ruin her professionally and financially. He gave a humorless laugh. I'm guessing that's you. I sighed. After she tried to clear out our wedding fund and lied. About contributing to it? Yeah, that's me. My lawyer sent a cease and desist. We sat there for 2 hours, trading notes like war survivors, comparing battle scars. Jessica hadn't just been unfaithful, she had been living 2 lives, carefully curated for maximum gain. She'd told Ryan I was abusive to justify why she was never around. Told me she was working late while she was with him. Pressured me into a mortgage I couldn't afford, while nudging him to fund her business venture. As we were about to leave, Ryan paused. There's one more thing. Last month, she told me she thought she was pregnant. My blood ran cold. She backtracked when I started asking about ultrasounds, doctor appointments. Said it was too early. I had a weird feeling. I thanked him, honestly. It took guts to confront this. As we stood to leave, he looked me square in the eye. We both dodged a bullet, man. But you were the brave one. You called her bluff. I left the cafe feeling a strange mix of vindication and numbness. Later that afternoon, I met with Cher again, bringing her everything Ryan and I had discussed. Her expression darkened. This changes things, she said. The abuse allegation? That's defamation, plain and simple. We document everything, timestamp it all. Let's see how they respond before we escalate. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, Kyle called. His voice was breathless. Dude, you're not going to believe this. Jessica got a phone call while we were in a meeting. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Ran out, came back 20 minutes later, packed up her desk, and left. What? Her boss says she's taking personal leave, effective immediately. What did you do? I explained everything. Meeting Ryan, comparing timelines, the fake pregnancy story, and the abuse claims. Kyle was speechless for a few seconds. I knew she was intense, but this is sociopathic. The next morning, my phone rang again. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mike, this is Rebecca Goldstein, Jessica's attorney. I need to speak with you directly. I kept my voice calm. All communication should go through my lawyer. But she interrupted. I'm no longer representing Ms. Chambers. There was a pause on the line, a quiet sigh. Just so you're aware, she continued, I withdrew after repeated misrepresentations from my client. If she contacts you, she's doing so without legal counsel. I thanked her and hung up, trying to absorb what this meant. Jessica had lost her lawyer, burned the last bridge she had. I called Cher immediately. She wasn't surprised. Classic meltdown. The image she built, it's crumbling. But don't get comfortable yet. She might get desperate. That night, I wrote everything down. The lies, the betrayal, the moments of clarity. It felt like shedding a heavy coat I didn't know I'd been wearing. Denver was close now, within reach, and I wasn't just escaping. I was starting fresh. Before bed, I reread my messages with Ryan. As twisted as it all was, there was some comfort in knowing the truth. Jessica's web had caught us both, but it was unraveling fast. The next morning, I stepped onto my balcony. The Seattle air was brisk but clean. I brewed coffee just to enjoy it. For the first time in weeks, I felt still. No alarms, no accusations, just peace. Denver wasn't just a city. It was a promise, a clean slate, a future I'd build for myself without compromise. I resigned from her case this morning after discovering my client provided materially false information. I cannot and will not be party to fraud or defamation. I was speechless. Her own lawyer had dropped her. Later that day, I received an email from Jessica's work address. The subject line simply read, "Please." Against Sherry's advice, I opened it. Mike, I know I've made terrible mistakes. I'm seeing a therapist now and taking medication for my issues. I never meant for things to go this far. Ryan told me you two met. I know how it looks, but it wasn't like that. I was confused and scared about our future. Please don't file any lawsuits. My parents are devastated. My job is on the line. I'll do anything to make this right. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to Sher with a brief note. I think she's finally realizing actions have consequences. The final communication came a week later, not from Jessica, but from her father. He asked if we could meet at a small park near my apartment. Despite everything, I agreed. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was closure. Mr. Chambers looked like he'd aged a decade in just 2 weeks. The confident, buttoned-up businessman I once knew had been replaced by a weary father, his eyes shadowed with regret. "Mike," he began, his voice rough with fatigue, "I owe you an apology, a big one. Jessica, she's not well. She's been diagnosed with some serious issues." He explained that she had struggled with mental health since college, but had resisted treatment at every turn. The image of perfection she projected to the world was an exhausting performance, one that eventually crumbled under its own weight. "We've convinced her to enter a residential treatment program," he said. "It's the only way forward. But before she left, she asked me to give you this." He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a cashier's check, $22,500. The exact amount I'd saved for our wedding, and a handwritten note, short and to the point. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused. You deserved better." We shook hands, awkward at first, but then something softened, and it turned into a brief hug. As he turned to walk away, Mr. Chambers paused and looked back. "By the way," he said, voice gentler now, "congratulations on the job in Denver. A fresh start sounds like exactly what you need." And he was right. As he walked away, I remained, seated on the park bench, holding the envelope and letter in my lap. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into the past, into every memory and lesson I hadn't yet fully processed. That cashier's check wasn't just money. It was the final severing of the life I thought I was building. It was her way, however flawed, of acknowledging what she'd done. And the note? Simple, maybe even inadequate, but real. It didn't undo the damage, but it showed that finally she saw it. I didn't feel vindicated, not triumphant, just relieved. The worst was over. The smears, the betrayal, the humiliation. And though the path ahead wasn't guaranteed to be easy, at least now, it was mine to walk. Freely. Fully. That evening, I boxed up the last of my belongings. I labeled one box, keep, and the rest, let go. Some things were easy to discard. Gifts from her, reminders of our past. Others took a moment longer, but with each decision, I felt lighter. Denver wasn't just a new job. It was a clean slate, and I was finally ready to start living it.